Well, let's all turn in our Bibles to 1 Corinthians 15. The plan is to be in 1 Corinthians 15 this week, and then next week. And next week will be our last week in 1 Corinthians 15. And if we're just looking ahead just a little bit, for me it's just a single page turn, but you'll notice that 1 Corinthians 16 is right around the corner, which means that we are getting so close to finishing our time in the book of 1 Corinthians together. It's been a journey, and I hope that it's been profitable for all of you, as I know it has been for me. But here we are today, 1 Corinthians 15, and we're beginning in verse 35. So let's look at verse 35 together. And we're going to go all the way through verse 49 today. And so what I'd like to do, just as we begin, just read that entire passage, and we'll begin to break it down a little bit this morning. So this is 1 Corinthians 15, beginning in verse 35, and it says, "But someone will ask, 'How are the dead raised? And with what kind of body do they come?' You foolish person, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And what you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or some other grain. But God gives it a body as He has chosen, and each kind of seed its own body. For not all flesh is the same, but there is one kind for humans, another for animals, another for birds, and another for fish. There are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, but the glory of the heavenly is of one kind, and the glory of the earthly is of another. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars, for star differs from star in glory. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. What is sown is perishable, and what is raised is imperishable. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, and it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Thus it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. But it is not the spiritual that is first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. The second man is from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. And as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven." All right, as we break down our text this morning for our own comprehension and application of the text of what Paul is saying here, we'll begin just in verse 35 with a question that's being asked. And the entire time here, as we look through these verses together, the entire time Paul is answering this question for the people in Corinth. Now, as Paul often does, he asks questions that he anticipates someone, maybe one of his objectors, would ask. And that's a good way to argue or present a case, is you anticipate questions that are going to be asked of your case, and you go ahead and ask them, maybe to yourself, and then you answer them, right? So this is what Paul's doing here. The issue at hand is that some in the church in Corinth do not believe that dead people are raised from the dead at any point after they're dead. That's the issue, right? And Paul says, well, I'm telling you that it is true. And if it's true that the dead are raised, what kind of body is that resurrection body? And we might think, oh, it's a legitimate question, I think, right? So the body is dead. And Paul says, well, that dead body is going to be raised. And they say, well, okay, what kind of body will they come with? And although possibly a bit of a morbid thought, we have to go there just for a second in order to think what possibly is being asked. What happens to a dead body? Well, it decays, right? Does a dead body decay? And as you sit and you think, there are many different ways that people die, right? And it could be that people die in many different scenarios and different things happen to their bodies when they die. So for example, it could be the case that many people, after they're dead and their body decomposes, that actually there is not even bones to work with. You understand what I'm saying? And so the question is, well, if the dead are raised, what kind of body are they coming with? Is that dead body, does it come out of the ground like in ways that we've seen in old horror films or something like that? Is that what we're to envision? Is that what we're to imagine? And so Paul takes his time throughout these verses to say, well, let me tell you what it's like. Let me tell you what this resurrection body is going to be. And he does it in two different ways. At first, he does it with analogies, and then second, he does it with realities. Right? At first, he wants us to have a picture of what's going to happen with things that we already know and are familiar with. And then second, he wants us to see it in more detailed realities. Okay? So that's the first and second parts of what's happening here. Now, something I think that I haven't answered is a question, maybe I guess I haven't asked the question, right? Is why didn't they believe in a resurrection from the dead? Now, when you were not a believer, some of you, many of you were raised in Christian homes, and for you to believe in a resurrection from the dead, was it this big hurdle that you had to overcome, or was it something, simply accepted? Just think about it for a second. Did you ever have to wrestle with the reality that the dead are raised? Or was it something that you simply accepted as reality? So we're asking here, what was it that was a roadblock for them that when Paul said, he even preached the gospel, and they confirmed it when he preached the gospel to them, right? Jesus was raised from the dead, and they said, yes, we believe. So then they believe in a resurrection from the dead? They had to, right? But now something is happening for them that they're struggling to believe that the dead are actually raised. Why? What's happened? What's the issue? Is that a possibility for us that a teaching comes into our church and someone says, there actually is no resurrection from the dead. Once we die, we're dead. Is that possible? That something could creep in? Well, sure, it's possible, right? We'd be naive to not think that something like that could creep in. Because the secular naturalist, do they believe there is a resurrection from the dead? If you didn't know, the answer is no, right? Famously, Carl Sagan leans against a tree and says, this tree and me, we're made of the same stuff, right? And so, naturalistic secularism does not believe that there is life after death. Is naturalism and secularism, humanism, are these types of philosophies prevalent in our culture? And do you come in contact with them regularly? Well, yeah, we do in all kinds of ways. So is it possible then that such a teaching could invade the church and we say, well, I guess they're right. There is no resurrection of the dead because when we die, we're just dead. What was it for them? Was that same type of influence prevalent in their day? Well, the answer is no, because the theories that we have today are somewhat modern, right? So what was the issue then? And there are two sources that their issue could have come from. Now, when we break down these potential issues or roadblocks for their belief in the resurrection, you're probably going to say, well, that's not a temptation for me, so your detour into this was irrelevant. And I would say that's not true. I would say the reason for a detour and looking into the influences for them historically ought to help us to see that we are just like them. And if the whole churches could be led astray into teachings like this, what prevents us from being led astray into teachings like this? So we would be foolish to think that we can't be led astray. So we need to be careful, understand what was happening for them, and it's instructive for us that we might be able to fortify our faith. Okay? So it's apologetic in nature. So two possible influences here that I see. Number one would be the Jews. And whether you can see that or not, I know it's a little small. Acts 23, 6 through 8. Let me read it for you. Now when Paul perceived that... I'm not going to take that detour. Now when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, "Brothers, I am a Pharisee, son of a Pharisee, and it is with respect to the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial." And when he had said this, a dissension rose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For, here's why they were divided. The Sadducees say there is no resurrection, nor angel, nor spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So, the Sadducees of the day were materialistic in their worldview. Okay, you might say that's strange. A Jewish person saying there is no spirit, there is no angel, there is no resurrection. Yes, that's actually much like modern Judaism. They are secularists, many of them, vast majority. They say there is no resurrection, there is no spirit, there is no angel, and in fact, we're just material in nature. So that when our body dies, whatever it is internally that operates within us, whatever you call it, your heart, your spirit, your soul, whatever that is, it's material in nature. And so when you die, it dies too, because it's just material. That was a prevalent mindset at this time in history, especially with the Sadducees. And the Sadducees also, by the way, you do know, I've told you this before, it's cheesy. I don't always like cheesy stuff. I normally don't. But this is actually helpful, okay? In Bible college years ago, a guy who was teaching one of my first ever New Testament survey classes helped me to remember this, and it's stuck with me forever. So it must work, okay? It must work. And so he says, you know why they're called Sadducees? And he said, well, it's because they don't believe in the resurrection of the dead, and that's why they're so sad, you see. So, now, the reason I'm giving you that is because when we now go and we read our Bibles, and we read of these sects of Jews, which the Pharisees and Sadducees were the two prominent sects of Jews. There were more subsets, but these were the prominent ones, and the most prominent ones were the Sadducees. And their teachings were actually commonplace among the people, right? They kind of held dominance. So whatever the Sadducees were believing, that's kind of what the masses of the Jews were believing, right? Just think for a second. Is there a teaching of Christianity that holds to the masses? Are we alive this morning? Is there a teaching that holds to the masses of Christianity, and there are teachers that influence those beliefs? Or did everyone just independently, randomly all think the same heretical things? Or is there influence? Is there teaching influence? There's teaching influence. And unfortunately, what holds the masses is incorrect. Unfortunately. Same was true in Paul's day. Do you see it? The Sadducees held the dominant teaching strain. And so that's what was infiltrating the masses. Was the belief that there is no resurrection of the dead? There's no spirit, there's no angel? None of this stuff exists. When you die, you're dead. Paul comes along and says, Jesus rose from the dead. How'd they feel about that? They thought he was insane. And so Paul says, he's preaching, he looks around, half of you are Sadducees, half of you are Pharisees. I know what'll get them riled up. The reason I'm on trial is because the Sadducees are talking to me about the resurrection of the dead, and the Pharisees, who Paul was, the Pharisees they lose their minds again. Oh, here we go in this age-old debate about the resurrection of the dead, and so they start discussing these things among themselves, right? Okay, so they were materialistic. I better move on from that. So that's what they were holding, and so is it possible at this time in history that Jews were infiltrating the belief systems of new Christian churches? Is it possible? Yes. It was happening all over the place. Actually, this is one of Paul's primary issues. I mean, just read the book of Galatians, right? The Judaizers were everywhere. And now most of them were teaching other heretical things, such as you need to be circumcised or obey the law in order to be a Christian. And Paul said that's not true. Right? But they were teaching other things as well. So I think there's a possible influence here, but another possible influence comes from the Greeks. Because Well, let me just read for you in Acts 17, just a couple of verses. It says, verse 17, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" And others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." What's the big deal? Acts 17, 30 through 32. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. But others said, "We will hear you again on this." Why is that? Well, in Greek philosophy and the thoughts of the time, one of them is we see that there were Epicurean philosophers there. And Epicurean philosophy is actually very similar to the philosophy of the Sadducees, that everything is material. And just like your body, your soul dies when your body dies. And so everything is material, so when you die, everything dies. And so when you say there's a resurrection of the dead, why do they mock? Why do they have a hard time believing you? Because the soul is material, it's not immaterial. Now, I've been kind of harping on a particular reality for the past few weeks, which is the immortality of the soul, that we are embodied souls, right? The soul remains, right? Is everyone with me here? Yes. When you die, when your body dies, is that the end of you? Or do you remain? You remain, right? So if your worldview, though, was the soul is material, so when I die, my soul dies, would you have a hard time believing that you could be raised from the dead? Yes. And they had two influences, right, that was telling them, the soul is material. When you die, you're dead. And so it was hard for them to overcome. And being in Corinth, right, which we made parallels to other places on earth, such as Las Vegas or something like that, where it's not a good town morally, but also there's so many influences from so many parts of the world that they had all these philosophies, Jewish philosophies, Greek philosophies, all infiltrating the church. And this is how it ended up for them. So should we not also be careful that worldly influences and philosophies do not infiltrate the church? Should we be on our guard against them? Yes. So he asks, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? This is Paul's rhetorical question, anticipating his objectors. And now he's going to answer for them this question in the verses remaining through verse 49. And he's going to tell them in two different ways, and first is by analogy. Okay, so let's look at verses 36 through 41. And he's going to answer the question, how are they raised? Well, I'll tell you how the body is raised. And I'm going to do it first by giving you some analogies so that you might understand, and then I'll fill in the empty spots. Okay? So, the answer in analogies. First, verses 36 through 38, he says, consider seed bodies. Seed bodies, that might seem strange. Hopefully it won't in a second, okay? Consider seed bodies. Verses 36 through 38. Let's look at it. It says, you foolish person, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. What you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or some other grain, but God gives it a body as he has chosen, to each kind of seed its own body. Okay? We'll pause right there just for a moment. First, Paul says, I know you all understand seeds. And you understand, you have to please picture a seed. If you don't, you're missing the whole point. Because Paul is saying, picture the seed. Imagine a seed. Imagine what a seed becomes. So he says, a seed. Do you not know that what you sow does not come to life unless it dies first? And so we have a hard time with this because maybe we're thinking, well, a seed doesn't die, right? And then come to life as a plant. But is that Paul's point? No, what he's saying is you take a seed, and just like a body that dies, you bury it, right? And once it's dead in the ground, what happens to that seed next? It comes to life and it looks like a seed? No. comes to life and it looks like something else entirely. Right? So this is his point. So he takes something that we do understand, and he's saying, imagine that first, and then I'll tell you how it works. But first imagine this. You're asking what kind of body your resurrection body is. And he says, well, just consider the seed for a moment. When a seed dies and you bury it, what kind of body does it have when it comes up from the grave? A different body entirely, right? Jesus used a seed analogy for his own glorification. John 12, 23 and 24, Jesus answered them, the hour has come, the Son of Man is to be glorified, and truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. You got to bury the thing first, and then it comes to life. Jesus said, that's about to happen to me, right? And it did, didn't it? This did happen to Jesus. Okay, so consider seed bodies. That's good. We have that now. And I would just say, first of all here, remember that this is an analogy, and there's not necessarily a one-to-one correspondence here. We need to be careful, because you're thinking, well, I can't be glorified unless I die first. And that's actually not true. Reason being, Paul also tells us that when the Lord returns, some people are still going to be alive. They didn't need to die first. They were just caught up together with the Lord in the air, and they will be with him forever. So it's not, you got to understand it's an analogy, okay? It's an analogy. So he's saying, just like the seed is buried and it's sown, what is sown is not what it will be. The body that it has when it's sown is not the body that will be. Is that already helpful to us in understanding the resurrection body? Aren't you already thankful that this is not the body that's going with you? I am. Each kind of seed produces what's intended. So, for example, a tomato seed is going to produce a tomato plant, not an oak tree. Right? And that's expected. This type of reality is also interwoven into Paul's mindset here for a reason, is because you are a human being and not something else. Right? You are a human being, and the seed that is sown, that is your body, when it is brought back to life, it's going to have a body fitting for its new existence. And it's going to be so much greater than the one you have now. A little summary here. Seeds teach us that a single living creature can have two types of bodies, a natural body and then a glorious body after, right? Is that what the seed teaches us? That what is dies, and when it comes back to life, it's something different, but yet, I would say, organically associated with what has died. It's not something so new that it's not that thing anymore. For example, a tomato seed produces a tomato plant. It's connected to the thing that was sown. So it's not so new that the new you is not even actually connected to the old you at all. When you are raised, it is still you, but it is a new you, a glorious you, right? In what way will we still be us? That's a different conversation, but very interesting to consider. But Paul doesn't answer that for us here. He's saying, I want you to understand what kind of body it will be in the resurrection. So we learn from the seed. Next he says, consider fleshly bodies. Verse 39, not all flesh is the same. Now, if you're following along in an ESV, it has the word for. That's unfortunate. The word does not exist in the Greek. It's not connected to a relationship to what preceded it. It's not giving us an explanation or something like that. It starts with the word not. Okay? Not all flesh is the same. There is one kind for humans, another kind for animals, another kind for birds, another kind for fish. What is this all about? Why do we need to know that there are different types of flesh for different types of creatures? Remember, Paul is helping us to understand what the resurrection body is going to be like. He, first of all, is telling us that the body you have now, it's going to be buried, right? And it's going to be raised, something brand new, but yet connected to the thing that died. How does this help us? Well, for each type of existence, for each type of creature, that creature has a body fitting for its creaturely existence. In other words, the body you have now is fitting for your existence here on earth in the state that it's in. This is how God designed humanity to be, with all the distinctions and various differences, right, that we have between us. The body that you have as a human being is the body that God intended for humans to have. We are not designed, for example, like a snake or a bird or a fish or anything else. Could he have done that? Yes, but he didn't. And so each type of creature has a body fitting for its creaturely existence. You are human. You are not human. You have a human body for a human existence. And God intended it to be that way. Now that has implications on where we came from. I hope you see that, right? We did not evolve from animals that have different types of flesh, but God created these bodies of flesh as they are intended to be. And you might say, well, how can that be? That can't happen. Well, there's a very limiting idea on a miraculous God, okay? He did create different types of flesh for their own creaturely existence. And so he created humans as humans with their own flesh. So all that's being discussed here is that different types of flesh teach us that different creatures have different types of bodies that are fitting for their existence. In the new creation, it will be a new creation, meaning that you will need a body fitting for that existence. You have a current body that is fitting for this existence on this earth, but you will need a new body for your new place that's fitting for that existence. But then, third analogy, he says, consider heavenly and earthly bodies. So we have the seed, we have fleshly bodies, now we have heavenly and earthly bodies. And he says, the heavenly bodies and the earthly bodies, there are heavenly bodies and earthly bodies. But the glory of the heavenly is of one kind, the glory of the earthly is another. There's one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars. Stars different from star to star in glory. What's his point right here? How is this helpful at all in us understanding our resurrection body? It is helpful. Let's look at it for a moment. I believe that when he says earthly bodies, so he says heavenly bodies and earthly bodies, I don't think, he clarifies, so he's not saying heavenly bodies like the body you will have in heaven or like angelic bodies. That's not what he's saying. He's saying there are bodies fitting for the earth and there are bodies fitting for the heavens that you see, right? Got to remember that the word for heavens can mean a spiritual realm, but it can also mean the realm where the birds fly. It can also mean the realm where the stars live and the planets, okay? So we're thinking realm where the stars live and the moon and the sun, right? That's the heavenly bodies we're talking about. He actually says that, doesn't he? So earthly bodies then need to reflect what he had just previously spoken to us, humans, animals, birds, fish, verse 39. So he says, there are bodies fitting for those things that live on earth, and there are bodies fitting for those things that live in the heavens, right? Right? The sun has a different kind of body, and you just have to go, it's an analogy, okay? The sun has a body fitting for its heavenly existence. You follow that? The stars have a body fitting for their existence, and I know the sun is a star. I know that too, right? But the way it presents itself is very different to us, isn't it? The way it presents to the eye. And I think actually he's taking this model of glory from sun, lots of glory, moon, less glory, stars, even less, because that's how they appear to us, right? And so he says, and even the stars differ from glory to glory. Have you taken the time lately, even though it's still 100 degrees outside at night? Have you taken the time to go outside and look at the stars? I love looking at the stars. But when you notice and you look at the stars, they do differ in how they shine, don't they? There are some that are brighter, some that are less bright, some you can barely see, and the colors are different. but yet they are all bodies fitting for their existence. Earthly bodies ought to expect an earthly, well, those that live on earth ought to expect an earthly body. Those that live in the heavens ought to expect a heavenly body, right? Does that distinction make sense? We don't live out there. If we did, we'd have a body that's like that. But given that we're human, we live on earth and we have a human body, right? Now you might say, how is all of this helpful in any way? Why not just tell us the facts? Tell us what the body will be. And you have to be patient because the way God intended for us to understand is by means of analogy. We take things that are known to us, and it helps us understand things that are not yet known to us. There's a comparison that we have to understand, right? We understand seeds. We understand animals and humans and fish and birds. We understand the sun, the moon, and the stars, but we don't understand the resurrection body because none of us have experienced that. None of us have seen it. So we have to try to understand in things that we do know and the things that we have seen, right? So that's what Paul's doing for us. So the heavenly and the earthly bodies teach us that each part of creation has a body that is chosen by God for its appointed time, its appointed place, and its appointed purpose in existence. So, given that the heavenly bodies look the way they do, and your earthly bodies look the way they do you not see that if you were to live in a different location, that you would have a body fitting for the location where you live? Are you going to just be resurrected and live right back where you were living, right? You just got to go live in that house you lived in, right? No, we're going to be resurrected to a new existence in a new location. Therefore, in that new location, you're going to have a body fitting for that new location. Right? All right. That's how Paul answers this question by analogy. Let's look at how he answers this question now in Resurrection Realities, verses 42 through 49. Beginning in verse 42, he says, "So it is with the resurrection of the dead." And we'll stop right there because what he's telling us is consider all those analogies I just gave you. So it is with the resurrection of the dead. Or you could say, so is it. His point is, the analogies that I just gave you are to make you understand what is to be with the resurrection of the dead. So he's saying, consider all of this. Paul is setting them up to help them conceptualize the answers first, and then he's going to give us more details on how it actually works. So, you think about this. If you have never played kickball before, you don't know what the rules to kickball are, you've never seen it, you've never heard of it, and I have to explain it to you for the first time. But you are familiar with baseball. So I would say to you, kickball is just like baseball. And now, okay, that just filled in a million things for me right away, but then I have to say, but let me tell you some ways that it's different. Let me put some flesh on that skeleton of a thing I just gave you, right? So I conceptualize what the game is like, but then I need to tell you how it's a little different and how these things actually work together in specifics. In the same way, Paul is giving us a skeleton by means of analogy, and now he's going to fill it in for us. But he says, so it is with the resurrection, right? So let's see what he has to say. Consider these connections, right? Consider the connections. Verses 42b through 44a, first part of the verse there. It says, what is sown is perishable, and what is raised is imperishable. What is sown in dishonor is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Okay, we'll stop right there. All Paul's doing right here is he's setting up for us some ways for us to compare and contrast what the resurrection body will be. And we understand certain realities because of the analogies that he's given. So go ahead, Rob, to that next one. So this is all he's saying here in these few verses. That the perishable body that we have becomes, in the resurrection, imperishable. The body of dishonor we have now becomes a body of glory in the future, in the resurrection. The body of weakness that we have now becomes a body of power, and the natural body becomes a spiritual body, okay? What that doesn't mean, what what that last part doesn't mean, that the natural becomes spiritual. What that doesn't mean is that you simply exist in a spiritual form forever, right? And for us, in our conceptual world, like existing as a spirit body is something that people like. You like the idea of that. It seems right, okay? That we just exist as kind of a transparent, shadowy figure that can change shape and be in different places and fly and things like that, right? That's not what he's saying when he says that the natural becomes the spiritual, okay? He's not saying that the natural physical becomes something other than physical. He's saying it was naturally physical, and now it's going to be spiritually physical. It's going to take on a spiritual existence in perfection, okay? So it is going to be a physical body, but a spiritual physical body, better than the natural physical body, okay? Otherwise, a lot of Paul's arguments here would be kind of for nothing if he's all of a sudden saying, actually, by resurrection, I mean you just have a spiritual existence. No. There actually is going to be a physical resurrection of the dead. But the body that is to be in the resurrection is not the body you have right now. I remember being young and considering some of these things before I was a believer. And of course, your mind races with all the things that just can't possibly be true, right? And one of the things I thought is, I heard of this resurrection of the dead, and I was thinking, okay, what age do I appear? The age I was when I died? No thanks. What's the perfect age, right? Will I be a kid? I don't think I want that body again, right? Will I be, what's the ideal, how old was Adam? That's where my thought, how old was Adam when he was created? That must be the perfect age, right? Because, Adam wasn't born as a baby. So, what will be the resurrection body? How old will we be? Does Paul give us the answer? Does anything in Scripture tell us how old you are? Does it matter? No. It doesn't matter, right? I had no one to tell me that doesn't matter, right? I saw it as an objection. So he says, all these things that you know, what is perishable? Of course, we know what perishable means, right? It dies. You have perishable food at home, don't leave it too long, right? Because it will perish. It is sown in dishonor. Why? How? It is sown in dishonor, raised in glory. Why is it in dishonor? Why is it not already in glory? Why were we not created in our glorious state? I think we're going to answer that when we talk about Adam in a second. Sown in weakness. Why were we not sown in power? Why do we have a natural body first and then a spiritual body? Why didn't God just create us with the perfect form of ourselves now, and all this wouldn't need to happen? All this wouldn't need to take place. Why didn't God just do the perfect thing right away so that all of these things wouldn't have to play out the way they do? Why didn't God create an existence where no one dies? Why create the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Why create a creature who would rebel against him, Satan? Why do that? Let's continue to look. Second half of verse 44 now. So those are basic realities. Paul's just saying, it's not going to be like this, it is going to be like this. It's not going to be like this, it is going to be like this. So he's saying, all these things are like fallen, bad. All these weak, fallen things are going to be replaced with everything that's better. With everything that's better. So I think Paul's point is not to make a full argument here of everything is made known to us, but rather that our fallen, weak, natural body is temporary, and it will be changed into a glorious body. That's all he's saying, okay? And he's saying it in this manner. Let me just read, just for a second, because I'm not going to reference this as we continue to go, but let me just read Philippians 3:20 and 21. You probably know these verses when I start to read them, but just think of them in this context. Listen to what it says. Our citizenship is, where is it? In heaven. And from it we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. So just pause before I read verse 21. He doesn't say, and so we're waiting to die to go to heaven. Not what he said. He said, we are waiting for him to come to us, not for us to go to him. Why? Because the second coming of Jesus is when all these things come to pass. We need Jesus to come back, and either we're dead and we're united with him in heaven, we come back with him, or we're alive and we're caught up together with him when he comes. Okay? But either way, what we're waiting for is that coming of Christ and the general resurrection of the dead. That's what we're waiting for. And he says, who will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him to subject all things to himself. We are waiting for a transformation to take place. He will transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body. That is a reality that's going to happen. But let's look at this final section here where Paul says, let's consider Adam and Jesus, and this gets more theological in nature. Okay? Let's consider Adam and Jesus. He says, if there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Now, Paul, just remember before we continue on, just remember that Paul was a Pharisee, right? A trained Pharisee. Did the Pharisees believe that there is spirit, an angel, and resurrection of the dead? Did the Pharisees believe that? Yes. Okay, so Paul is saying, contrary to what you've heard, if there is a natural body, materially speaking, that is simply natural and material and dies, there is also a spiritual body. Okay? Something that remains. Thus, it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. What a difference. The first Adam, the first man, Adam, became a living being. And the last Adam, not the second Adam said here, but the last, because there's not another Adam figure coming. Okay? He's the last Adam figure to come. There were lots of Adam figures. Okay? There was Adam, and then typologically speaking, there were other Adams who also failed, okay? You have Noah who failed as an Adam figure, all right? And you have Abraham who failed as an Adam figure. You have all the patriarchs who failed as Adam figures. You have the collective body of Israel who failed as an Adam figure, okay? You have all these figures of Adam who came and could not be perfect sons of God. They couldn't do it. Could Adam be a perfect son of God? No, he failed miserably. And then all these figures that come where we think that that's going to be the guy. That's going to be the one. He's going to be the one where we see all the blessings and all the promises. Where do all the blessings and promises land? On the perfect Son of God, the last Adam, Jesus. On Jesus himself. So we have the first Adam, real historical figure, Adam, and he became a living being. How did that happen? God created his body first and then breathed life into him. And that's what's being referenced, is that he was a body, but he didn't become a living being when he was just a body, a shell. Did he? God needed to give him life. And so it is with you, Paul is saying. Because the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. So how is it that we get the breath of God blown into us? Through Jesus. Through Jesus. So if you have Jesus and you have the Spirit who is from Jesus, that is the Spirit that gives you life. Just like Adam's body needed life, your body needs life. And we get that through Jesus Christ himself. Because he says in verse 46, it was not the spiritual that's first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. And I think he's making a comparison here between the natural body of Adam and the body that became a living being. It was natural first, and then it was spiritual, right? But in a greater sense, in a fuller sense, we are natural now, but what we will be in our spiritual form has not yet come, right? Although we have the Spirit of God now, we do not have the Spirit of God In the same way that we are going to be glorified in the future, things will be different. You understand that, right? The way we have fellowship with God now is going to be a way different than the way we have fellowship with God in the future. You understand that too? Okay, so we have to, and this is that whole idea that I've been talking about of inaugurated eschatology, okay, is that we have a tension here. Jesus has accomplished things, but we have not yet grasped hold of all the fullness of them, right? You do know there's more to come. You do know this isn't it. You do know that the body you have is going to be a different body. You do know Jesus is coming back. You do know there's going to be a judgment. You do know that the fullness of life that Jesus promised is not yours yet in the sense that you have not laid hold of it. It's in the future. You taste it now, but it is not fully yours yet. It's coming. So, we maybe understand a little bit more why Paul says, if we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. Because what is this existence? What is this? Is this the greatest that it gets? Right? And of course, Paul is saying, no. There is more to come. So, this is where our hope is placed. So Paul quotes, essentially, Genesis 2:7. And so he's referencing back to that story. Now, when he says, the first man was from the earth, he was a man of dust, the second man is from heaven, he's creating a contrast for us. And then he says in verse 48, as was the man of dust, so also are those who are of dust, and as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. And we're thinking, okay, verse 49 helps us to understand, just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, so shall we bear the image of the man of heaven. Okay, so all those verses go together, helping us create a full picture of what he's trying to say. Okay, so who is this man of dust and who is the man of heaven? And what does it mean that we are in their image? We all as human beings are created in the image of God. We are created in the image of God, and this is well known. We know this, don't we? And so Paul is breaking down two different categories here. Neither of them is image of God. One is image of the man of dust, and the other is image of the man of heaven. And we do not yet reflect the image of the man of heaven. It says, we have borne the image of the man of dust, and we will bear the image of the man of heaven. But we haven't yet, okay? But we are all bearing the image of God now, but not perfectly, because of how God intended things to be. And I'm going to say this just in a very summarized fashion. I actually think I have a summary. Let's just go ahead and go to that. So this is kind of painting a picture to put this reality in, okay? So we have a canvas, and I'm painting a full picture. You can see the whole picture. I want you to see the whole picture before we zoom in on one aspect of the picture, okay? Mankind was created to be in fellowship with God as sons. We do understand this, as children of God. That's a vertical relationship, yes? And as sons of God, and God being the king of all creation, man was given the mandate to have dominion over all the earth. Do you remember that? Go and have dominion. Do you remember this? That's the mandate that was given. That's a horizontal reality to the earth. So you have the relationship with God, vertical, sons of God, children of God, vertical, and then you have the horizontal reality, go and have dominion. Got it? As his, how? As his prophets, priests, and kings. That is, I'll define those three things, keeping his word in creation, prophets, living in and mediating his presence in creation, which is a priestly function, and then ruling over his creation as kings. You see that? Adam and Eve were to keep the word of God, were they not? They were to live in the presence of God, were they not? And they were to have dominion over the earth, were they not? That's a prophet, priest, and king function as sons of God. It is their sonship, it is their relationship to the king that enables them to have a horizontal relationship to the earth so that they might do these things as sons of God. You following this? Yes? So, if you were not a son of God, a child of God, you would not be able to do these things. You can't be in the presence of God. You can't give his word, keep his word, and make it known to the earth. You can't do that. All right? You also can't rule over the creation. None of those are given to you. They're given to you because you are children of the King. That's why you do those things. So it's who we are that feeds what we are to do. That is the vertical and the horizontal. You with me? But humanity failed miserably to be children of God. So what of this prophet, priest, king function? And you already know that. You already know how those things worked out. That is why Jesus comes as our, what? Our perfect prophet, priest, and king. Perfect Son of God to fulfill all the things his children were to be. And who is to have dominion, by the way? He will have dominion. He will accomplish in all the earth what we were incapable of accomplishing. And we are his children. Right? We are sons of God. And because he is the Son of God, when we find ourselves in Christ, we are sons of God with the Son of God. I was just trying to summarize that. Now, how does this relate? Go to that next one there, Rob, please. So the first man, Adam, was a man of dust. That's what Paul just told us, right? What does it mean that he was a man of dust? Well, God created him from the dust of the earth, didn't he? Isn't that how Adam was created? Okay. So he was a man of dust. That's the natural body that was born of the dust of the earth. As those in his image, our bodies are like his. What does it mean to be in his image? Well, although we are all in the image of God, in a sense, just like when Adam had a son, he had a son how? In his image. And so it's talking about representation. So we represent God on the earth, but we failed miserably. But we also represent the $10 word for that is progenitor, our original human being, Adam. We represent him, but physically, right? Unless you think that humans, male and female, are physically made in the image of God, so that if you were to go to heaven, transport yourself to wherever God is, he just looks like you and me. Is that how you were made in the image of God? That you look like him physically? No. To be made in the image of God means that we are his representatives, not that we bear his image physically, right? That we look like him, but that we represent him. And how do we do as his representatives? Right? We needed a better representative, didn't we? We had one who represented God perfectly, Jesus. And we now find our identity in him, and so we have the favor of God on us, right? We are blessed by God. He is our Father. We have been brought into fellowship with him, not based on anything we did, but on everything that he did. It's amazing reality, a great exchange that takes place. But so we have the contrast between the man of the dust and the man of heaven. That's the second Adam or the last Adam. This is the spiritual body, born of the Spirit from heaven. As those in his image, our bodies will be like his. So there's the contrast. Just like we resemble Adam, we will resemble Christ. So this is not a reference to Jesus' incarnation when he came as a baby. Don't worry, you'll be like that too. No, that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is, he will come from heaven. So is the man of heaven. He will come from heaven, and in his existence is how you will be. You will be in that kind of existence. He was the first of its kind to go. Jesus has the first resurrection glorified body, and he will come from heaven, and you will have a body just like his. You're going to be like him when he comes, and you will see him, and you will know him, and you will have fellowship with him forever. It's a great reality that is to come. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. Now, I did want to end our time here talking about this in another place where Paul talks about the resurrection that I believe is an incredible summary of all that we've just talked about, and says it from another angle, because lots of information, I know, but let's not get derailed or miss the main point for what's being said. So I'd really like for us all to turn as we close, okay? Yes, that is coming. As we close, I want you to go to Romans 8, and I want to read just a handful of verses right here where Paul, in another letter that he wrote, but he's writing to a church in Rome rather than a church to Corinth, and he's talking about the same realities, but from a different angle. Just like you, when you say things from different perspectives sometimes, right? So Paul does when he writes. And I think gaining this perspective as well helps us to build a fuller picture of all that's happening. Okay? Romans 8, beginning in verse 9. I'm going to read this and maybe just make a few comments along the way. Not maybe, probably. I definitely will. Beginning in verse 9. You, however, so just understand this is talking to believers. Okay? That's the you, all believers, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. That is, if in fact the Spirit of God dwells in you. Does the Spirit of God dwell in you? Believer? Does the Spirit of God dwell in you? Yeah, how'd you get that? And what does that mean? Anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. What is the Spirit of Christ? Is Jesus the Spirit? Is Jesus the same as the Holy Spirit? Because then it says in verse 10, Christ, if Christ is in you, how is Christ in us? Is Christ the Spirit? No, but in the same way that Paul says that the last Adam became a life-giving spirit, he's talking about the function of God in the Trinity, in the Godhead, that life comes from him by means of the Spirit. You remember that Jesus said that the Holy Spirit will not come unless I first go to the Father? Right? So it's the Spirit that comes from Jesus. So you could say Christ's Spirit, right? So that's true. That's true. The Spirit that comes from Christ, because of what he did and what he accomplished, he went to the right hand of the Father, his ascension, his session, and then he sends the Spirit of God. That's the Spirit that now lives in believers. Okay? And if you don't have that Spirit, the Spirit of Christ, you don't belong to him. So yet another way to say that if you have the Spirit of God, you belong to him. If you don't have the Spirit of God, you don't belong to him. So all believers have the Spirit of God. You're not waiting on that second experience of grace, the baptism of the Spirit that comes subsequent to your conversion. That's not a reality, okay? All believers have the Spirit of God, because if you don't have the Spirit, you don't belong to him. Verse 11. Nope, verse 10. If Christ is in you, although the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is life because of righteousness. So in your body you experience the pains of death even here and now. Because you might think, if I have the Spirit of God in me, and that Spirit is life, right? If I have the Spirit of God, how is it that I can even die? That's actually a good question. Well, it's because you have another reality coming. When you die, you're not dead, right? You live. How? By means of the Spirit. You have life that is to come. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. If you have the Spirit of God, there is life to come, not death. Although death is also coming, but in a different way. Right? Death is a reality. We are going to die unless Christ comes back. How do we come to terms with that? Death is not the end. Death is not the end. This is also why we're told that we don't mourn as the world mourns, because we mourn as those who have hope. Hope in what? Hope in life, right? Hope in life. And if the Spirit is in you, it's that same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead also lives in you. Therefore, when you die, guess what's going to happen to you? So then, brothers, we are not debtors to live to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. If you live according to the flesh, you will die, but if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. Do you see that phrase right there? That doesn't come without meaning and baggage. You are sons of God. And if sons, what does he say? Verse 15. You did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the Spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. For I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. You know, there are new people here among us. Maybe today is your first time visiting with us, and maybe there are people here who I don't know all that well. Some of you I do know very well. But I know that there is a common human experience among all of us, and it is that we suffer, that we hurt, that we have pain, that we have grief, that we have seasons of time that are so difficult and so challenging. As those who have the Spirit of God, and as those who are in fact sons of God, you need to know something. As a child of God, the sufferings of this present time are not even worth comparing. They're not even, it's not even worth it. Don't even try. The comparison between present suffering and the glory that is to come, there's no comparison. It's far better than you can imagine. Do you believe that that reality is for you and that that reality is coming? If you have not placed your faith in Jesus Christ and the truth of the gospel, recognized your condition as a sinner before God, repented of your sin before Him, placed your faith in Jesus Christ, that hope does not belong to you. It is not yours. You are not a child of God. However, if you confess of your sinful condition before Him, you repent of your sin, that you confess Jesus as Lord, right? And you believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, then you will be saved. And you will receive the Spirit of God. You will be adopted as a child of God. And if a child, then an heir. There is an inheritance coming for you. But not if you're not His child. You have no inheritance. Only death awaits. And we've talked about that as well. Let me just finish out reading. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. The creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself, will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. You see, the very earth, the very existence that we have, you realize that it's all going to be made new. It's all going to be made new. And even the creation itself is groaning with pains, waiting for the revelation of the children of God. That's us. That's us. And when does that happen? When Christ comes back. And all things will be made new. All things will be made new. Yes, including you, but including all creation. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning with childbirth and pains of childbirth until now. Not only the creation, but we ourselves, who are the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly as we eagerly await the adoption of as sons and the redemption of our bodies. The redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved. But who hopes for that? Now, hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it. How? You didn't know a question was coming. You tuned out for a second. If we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it. How? With patience. Is that how you're waiting? Is that how you're waiting? With patience? Often no. Isn't that right? That's a better answer. Often no, I'm not waiting with patience. But I'm waiting with trouble and grief and despair and suffering. There is a hope that's coming for us, right? And doesn't that change completely the perspective we take with each and every day and each and every breath and every word that we speak? So if you have the Spirit of God and if you have the down payment of your inheritance now, we are debtors. We are debtors, however, not to live according to the flesh, but to live according to the Spirit. You understand what that means? Your job now is to live like a child of God in the Spirit now, in accordance with how you will live for all eternity. And how are you doing with that? Are you living like a child of God now by obedience to the Spirit, or are you just waiting until you die and then God will make you perfect so I don't actually have to put anything into it right now? Did the churches in the first century deal with that? That's called licentiousness or antinomianism. Those are the big words. What that means is, God doesn't care what I do right now, I have salvation. And that is a lie. If you have the Spirit of God, you will live according to the Spirit of God because you are a debtor to live according to the Spirit. You have the first fruits, right? The Spirit is in you. You've got it. You've got life. Now, live like it. Live like you have life. What kind of life? Not eat and drink and be merry for tomorrow you die. Wrong kind of life. Jimmy told us all about that. What kind of life do we live? Life according to the Spirit. In obedience to God as faithful children of God. That's the life he calls us to, in anticipation of our future life to come. So, if the dead are raised, what kind of body do they have? We see that as an objection. Yeah, right, like that can happen. Well, Paul just gave us the answer, didn't he? What kind of body will it be? A new and glorious body. And if that is to be the case, how should that affect how you live today? I think it have massive effects on how we live today. Let's all pray together.